Hi, I'm Rochelle, and you're watching or listening to Box F1 Pod. Welcome to the Azerbaijan Grand Prix review. Today we're going to be debriefing everything that happened this weekend in Baku. And holy shit, like what a race. If Brenda and Crofty were here, which they were not for some reason, but if they were here, they would certainly say this was some very racy racing. But since they were not here, I'll say it. Very racy racing. While we talk about everything that happened on and off track, I'm going to be making plouf, which is an Azerbaijani classic dish. It's very traditional to the country. However, as a disclaimer, my grandmother grew up both in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, and she taught me a different way of making plouf. And for sanity's sake, I'm going to be following that process of how I make it. And besides the lamb, rice, carrots, onion, cumin, salt. I'm going to be following the process that I'm used to making, and I'm going to be implementing some of the Azerbaijani flavors that are not traditional in like Uzbek or Kazakhstan plouf, which includes both dried fruit and saffron. And so that's going to be a little different, but I'm going to be following the process my grandmother taught me. So I'm kind of winging it today. There's no recipe. I'm just guessing. So hopefully I guess correctly, and hopefully it's delicious and beautiful. But that's actually not relevant to you listening or watching. What is relevant is that we're going to be talking about Baku and everything that happened and all the drama that unfolded both on and off track. And as usual, we're going to kick things off with the off-track drama, which means it's time for the digital warm-up. Lap 1, F1 news. Adrian Newey has gone to Aston Martin. There have been rumors of this for a while, although it was pretty much between Aston Martin and Ferrari. The biggest clue we had that it wasn't going to be Ferrari was Jeremy Clarkson, who told a random Dutch journalist several months ago that he knows that Adrian Newey is house hunting in Oxfordshire and not Maranello. And that turned out to be the most factual evidence we had, because he is in fact going to Aston Martin. There's been a lot of memes about it, but one of my favorite memes is the resurfacing of this Japanese F1 fan who's wearing like a rice field hat, you know, like the one that goes like this. And he's fully dressed in a Red Bull costume with like that hat. And then he immediately strips in the middle of the interview into an Aston Martin uniform and like an Aston Martin hat. And that has been reshared so many times, including by F1. And Adrian Newey's wife, Amanda, commented on the Twitter post that F1 did about this meme and said, "That's literally the first thing I thought of when we made this decision," and I laughed. It's just in a nutshell what's going on with Adrian Newey. A lot of the other memes have mostly been focused on the fact that Lawrence Stroll is like buying his son a Newey. But like, let's be honest, as always, Lawrence is doing what it takes for his team to be successful and to be in contention for a driver's championship. And really, it's most likely setting up Fernando for a World Drivers' Championship, assuming he can still compete at the level he's at currently in 2026. Fernando obviously is not the issue at the moment at Aston Martin. The issue is the car. And hopefully with Adrian Newey at the helm, he will give Fernando a fighting chance, because how amazing would it be? I know it used to be like much older people that were winning Grand Prix and World Championships, but how great would it be to see at that time would it be a 47-year-old Fernando competing for a World Drivers' Championship against people like Max and Oscar. And I just think it'd be amazing. And I do feel bad that I'm not including Lance in this conversation. But like, let's be honest, Lance has a place on the team, but Lawrence is building a championship winning team. And that champion is definitely Fernando in his mind. I know that they are fighting tooth and nail to get Max Verstappen. Sounds like everyone is fighting tooth and nail to get Max Verstappen. Whether they succeed or not, I do think that Lawrence is more likely to swap his son with Max than he is to swap Fernando with Max. Again, depending where the condition Fernando is in 2026. But, you never know. At this moment in time, though, if Max was to say tomorrow, yes, I'm going to Aston Martin, I think Lance would be swapped out. And I think Lance knows that. And I don't think Lance cares. All right. That's pretty much it for F1 news. So moving on to lap 2, off-duty F1. This might be my favorite news that I've ever had the privilege of experiencing since I began following F1. But Charles Leclerc caused a fender bender driving one of his Ferraris in Monaco at the hairpin. And it's actually fucking hilarious. He literally at like 10 miles an hour taps a car in front of him. There's like a bunch of traffic at that hairpin. And the person that's filming it like zooms in and you can see Charles like peering out of the window and be like, oh, I caused the fender bender. And then retracts back into his car and that's it. Whether that person reported it, filed to insurance that Charles Leclerc, one of the best F1 drivers in the world, hit his car, I don't know. Whether he took it as a like blessing, I don't know. Or whether they all just moved on with their day because it didn't look like an aggressive tap. Didn't look like it caused any damage to anyone involved, but it was very funny that of all the places, of all the people, Charles Leclerc had a fender bender in Monaco. All right. In other news, Lewis Hamilton took New York City by storm. First, he attended the Women's US Open Finals. I have linked the first video that I saw of him at the US Open Finals and not everything that followed, but you can find it online. He was sat originally, the first video I saw was him sat with Noah Lyles, who is an Olympic sprinter gold medalist. But then every video I saw kept like zooming in, zooming out of the shot, and the shot kept including more people that I just wasn't expecting to be there. First video I saw was him with Noah Lyles. Second video I saw was actually on the other side of him was sitting Anna Wintour. Of all people, Anna Wintour was on the other side of Lewis Hamilton. But again, I know that Lewis Hamilton and Anna Wintour exist in the same universe because he's been to the Met Gala, he's into fashion, etc., etc. But then there was another zoom out, and Tina Fey was there behind him the whole time, reacting very intensely to what was going on court. And for some reason, Tina Fey and Lewis Hamilton existing in the same universe really never crossed my mind. But for some reason, seeing them is like Noah Lyles, Anna Wintour, Lewis Hamilton. Another zoom out, and behind him is one of the girls from Broad City, and in front of him is Shonda Rhimes and Al Roker. And still hilarious. Like everyone besides Tina Fey has registered to me in my brain that they all exist simultaneously with Lewis Hamilton, but it's still funny to see all these people in public. And I also think it's hilarious that the very first video was just him and Noah Lyles, as if everyone around them was just plebes, but they weren't. They're all famous. After the US Open Women's Finals, he did not attend the men's finals, but he did pop over to New York Fashion Week. He attended the Elias show, where he watched Kendall Jenner, and he was sat near, whose name I cannot remember, so this is an entirely pointless tidbit. And he was also sat near Naomi Campbell. And then he jetted off to Baku, as one does. And apparently he brought Naomi Campbell with him, because Naomi Campbell did wave the checkered flag at the race today. So I guess they both just went together. In other off-the-track news, Oscar posted a picture of him at last year's Baku and wrote, hopefully I'll eat more than 4 pieces of toast this year, because last year he was very vehemently sick. At the Baku Grand Prix, he ate like nothing. I think he had a stomach flu or something. All right. So also on social media, George posted a picture of him and Max back in their karting days, skipping down the track. And so he's like did a throwback and wished luck to the current competitors in the karting championship race. But it was really cute because there was a video caught of him showing Max that photo before he had posted it online, and they were laughing together. And George was like, "Weren't you disqualified after this photo?" And Max was like, "Yeah, I was disqualified." And it was really funny because if you think back to Baku last year, George and Max had that collision on track, and they were like yelling at each other after the race below the podium, and they were like calling each other dickheads and stuff, and it was really funny. But this year things have improved, and they're like reminiscing on the old times. And Checo was also there the whole time, and he was like looking at the picture too, and he's like giggling, and he was like, "You guys should recreate this." Which, just saying, 10 out of 10 suggestion. They definitely should recreate it. I hope they do. They won't, but I hope they do. All right. Matt from Matt P1 Tommy, was that the name of their new podcast? The ones who used to be charged of WTF1, who have now moved on to their own podcast. So Matt was interviewing Alex Albon, and he referenced a previous interview he had done with Carlos Sainz, where he asked him about his hair care routine, because Carlos Sainz's hair is perfect. And Carlos was like, I just shampoo my hair. So he was like, Alex, what's your hair care routine? And Alex was like, I just do what Liddy tells me to do. She tells me what to put in my hair, and it's Japanese. She tells me what to put in my face, and I do it. And that's why I look so good. And I love that. All right, moving on, lap 3, trackside of Baku. The celebrities that I did see present this week on track were Will Smith and Naomi Campbell, who I already talked about. She waved the checkered flag. But Will Smith was there. Carlos took a picture with him, but Will was like, I'm here for Lewis. Also, speaking of celebrities on track, I forgot that last week, Carlos Alcaraz, the tennis player, was at the Italian Grand Prix. And I think I mentioned it in last week's episode, but I was like, there's no evidence. There was, in fact, evidence. Pierre ended up posting a Monza dump, and Carlos and him were featured in that dump, laughing hysterically. So Carlos Alcaraz was, in fact, in attendance at the Italian Grand Prix. I've added some carrots into the plof. All right. Speaking of celebrities that attended Baku, Nicole Piastri was there, aka Oscar's mother, aka the queen of Twitter, or X. She did post a couple of pictures. She did a grid walk. One was a picture with Oscar's sign hanging on a lamppost, and the other was a picture of Yuki's sign hanging on a lamppost. And I really, really hope that I'm just recording this super early, and there will, in fact, come out content of her and Yuki together. And if not this week, there's always Singapore next week. And I just need to see them together. I need to see her meet him because she loves him like I love him. And he deserves to meet his #1 fan. In case I haven't talked about it before, Hattie, one of Oscar's sisters, so Hattie Piastri, posted a picture of her and her parents doing the Brat Charlie XCX dance. They're like, I think the apple's rotten right to the core. You know that what I'm talking about? They were all wearing merch, and everyone was wearing Oscar merch except for Nicole Piastri, who was wearing Yuki merch, which is very fitting, and I appreciate it. In other news, so I know you guys know that I'm a big Logan Sargent defender. However, his replacement, Franco Colapinto, from Argentina, who I really didn't want to like. But, like, unfortunately, he has an unnatural amount of riz, and I think he has won over every single person in the paddock, including myself. There is no better person to replace Logan, not only with his personality, by the way. He's not just like, it's not just riz. He also scored points in both races. So he's coming to F1 with a bang. It's unfortunate for him. There's only, I think, one official spot left in F1, and that would be the Kick Sauber spot. Technically, RB has an empty spot, but that's going to either Liam or Daniel. But damn, he's had quite an impact in his first 2 weeks in F1. And he's got riz for days. He's like such a flirt. Williams admin posted a video of her like speaking Spanish to Franco and tagged Duolingo. She's like, admin's learning Spanish for Franco. And the way he responds to her is like, oh, your Spanish has become very good. Yes, it's very, very good. And it's just, he says very little, and yet he says very much. Like, I would definitely be asking, what are we after that interaction? Like, the riz translates through the camera. I felt uncomfortable listening to him talk to the admin. And I am also curious, what are we, Franco? And like, kudos to him for having that riz and the talent in one specimen. That's just very impressive. There was a video of Lewis Hamilton and George Russell participating in the pre-race stretch that the mechanics do, you know, where they have the band and they're like doing all these stretches. And it was very funny because they're both like very into these stretches, and Lewis Hamilton accidentally loses grip on his band and just like whacks George across the face with his exercise band. And it was very funny. There was a really funny clip that went around with all the boys. It was Max, Carlos, Lando, Oscar, someone else. But Carlos clearly had a very like juicy piece of gossip and he was trying to whisper it to everyone. So Max just reaches up and whacks the microphone out of the way. Like the furry thing that's like hanging down. I think it was a Netflix mic, but he just like knocks out of the way and he like leans and he's like, yeah, okay, tell me. And Carlos is still like hiding his mouth because they know that we can still see them. And I'm just dying to know what this juicy piece of gossip was because Max was like, and everyone's like laughing because Max just whacked this microphone out of the way. And I just like, I'm dying to know what was said. What is the gossip? Fill us in. I just love that they yap in their spare time. It's great. Also in interviews, Alex was interviewed in the media pen and he was like, didn't I tell you? As if he's like best friends with the interviewer and he tells him everything. He's like, did I tell you? Me and Carlos are neighbors in Monaco. Like, yeah, we like see each other all the time. They don't see each other all the time. They've never been in Monaco at the same time. Basically, they've only run into each other in the elevator like once. But he was like, I really hope we get along next year because otherwise it's going to be awkward, which it will. It will be awkward. Also, in the post-qualifying press conference, Charles was asked if he ever listened to his own music before a race. And he was like, actually, before Monaco, I did listen to my own music. And it was very calming and it's very different to what I usually listen to. And it was great, clearly, because he won. So maybe he should make a habit of it. But then Oscar was asked what he listens to before a race. And before he has a chance to answer, Charles was like, is it my music? And Oscar looked like for half a second he was going to say, yeah, of course I listen to your music. But then he's like, no. No, I obviously do not listen to your music. And it was really funny. And he started giggling even more after that. But he also said that he like doesn't listen to anything unless Lando is playing something without headphones, which is, if he is, it's normally loud enough for the both of them, which checks out. Oscar doesn't listen to anything. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but like, does Oscar have like weird serial killer tendencies? Like, not listening to music, the like very calm behavior, like, is he a serial killer or is he just like super emotionally mature and has the mentality of a world champion? I feel like it's 50-50 between serial killer and world champion. Not entirely sure, but there are suspicious signs. Anyway, with that, we conclude our digital warm-up. On to the race run. Baku boys were unforgettable, fast, fresh, fierce till one of them walked. But let's start from the start before we celebrate who bopped to the top. Kicking it off with quali, when a shock rippled through the grandstands, Lando's out in Q1 for possible yellow flags. No one really understands. But how exciting that two rookies are racing in their second race ever and both made it to Q3. What? Like it's hard? It's like whatever. Ollie's replacing Kevin because his penalties have stacked, while Franco Calpinto is in week 2 of a grid-wide Riz attack. Also back for one night and one night only, it's Checo in the only place he won't drive slowly. Finally, the lights have gone out and away they all go. The top 4 is the same, except in third place comes Checo. Charles leads for another 20 laps before things get juicy. Oscar overtakes Charles in a move so brilliant it left us all woozy. And for the rest of the race, we've got Oscar fighting off Charles' DRS, while Charles is fighting for his life in dirty air, praying for success. With 2 laps to go, Carlos then catches up to the top 3 and is like, bye, as he overtakes Checo into P3. But Checo is like, hold the phone, Carlos, GTFO, P3 is mine to own. So he pushes into Carlos like he doesn't have half the track at his disposal, which forces Carlos into Checo and into the wall, causing both cars to total. So sad to see the end of both Checo and Carlos's race, but it means that both rookies score points whether or not their cars had pace. Congrats to Oscar for a triumphant win in Baku. He looks emotionless, but he's thrilled, I promise you. Nicole Piastri has missed yet another Pilates class. Her core may be in shite condition, but Oscar's a champ, so raise a glass. That's it for Azerbaijan. Next up is Singapore. We're shedding pounds, stressing out, and hopefully experiencing racy racing galore. Cheers. All right, On to analysis. So before I get started, I'm just going to run you through the plan of action for this plouf. I'm going to add in the lamb, let it brown. Then once the lamb is browned, I'm going to add in all the spices, add in the dried fruit. Once it softens, I'm going to add in the rice and the saffron. Water, once it sort of infuses, I'm going to cover it all with water up until the very top, put in the garlic bulb, the whole thing, and cover it, and it should be ready in 20-ish minutes after that. I'm going to put in some of the cilantro I have here, not all of it. Some of it will be for topping, but I need some of it in there just for the flavor. So with that said, put in the meat, and then I'm gonna talk about quali. All right, so the biggest shocker of quali was that Lando was out in Q1 because he said he saw a yellow flag. This has caused a lot of debate because whether he was told by the team there was a yellow flag, whether he mistook a white flag for a yellow flag, if the marshals accidentally waved the yellow flag instead of a white flag. Basically, everyone was fucking confused why Lando stopped. In his post-race interview, post-race, not post-quali, he said, like, I've seen everyone arguing about this, and I don't understand why they're arguing, because it wasn't about what the marshals showed. It was about the fact that on my dash, I saw yellow lights like blinking furiously at me. So it sounds like he's placing the blame. It sounds like the blame cannot be with the marshals. It can exclusively be with him misseeing yellow for white, which seems highly unlikely, or with the team displaying the wrong sign, or with the marshals showing yellow instead of white, the team seeing the yellow instead of white, and them showing Lando on his dash blinking yellow lights when it was in fact a white flag. Whatever it was, he ended up slowing down, couldn't complete his hot lap, and unfortunately ended up going out in Q1, which was the first time this entire season, and he's the first McLaren driver to do so. Up until this point, both McLaren drivers had the reputation of being able to make it into Q3 every race. In addition to Lando's crazy end to quali, a couple of shout outs. Ollie Bierman, who is filling in for Kevin Magnussen, who got all the penalty points required to be banned from a race, has been banned from a race. So Ollie Bierman filled in for him at Haas, obviously his team for next year. And he did great. He qualified P11, which is exceptional for a track like Baku, which is difficult and hard for an experienced driver, let alone an F2 driver trying it out for the first time. Franco qualified P9, which means he outqualified Alex Albon, his teammate. Everyone was sure he just had an easy time in Monza last week. They were like, oh, he only did well because it's Monza, but wait until he gets to Baku or Singapore. But he thrived. He did great. And he did great here. He's and qualified P9. And as much as I love Logan, I am highly impressed. Speaking of having your shit together in Baku, Checo literally just thrives at city circuits, particularly Baku. He's done well here a couple of times. And it's actually crazy because he has now qualified P4 and Max finished in P6. And that's crazy considering how they've been for the last 2 years. And it just shows that there's no place like Baku when it comes to Checo's performance. So the starting grid is as follows: Charles Leclerc, Oscar Piastri, Carlos Sainz, Checo Perez, George Russell, Max Verstappen, Fernando Alonso, Franco, Alex, Ollie Bierman, Yuki Tsunoda, Nico Hülkenberg, Lance Stroll, Daniel Ricciardo, Lando Norris, Valtteri Bottas, Zhou Guanyu, Pierre Gasly, Lewis Hamilton, and then Esteban Ocon. And just a brief recap of all of the penalties or the punishments enacted by the FIA before the race started was Zhou was required to start from the back of the grid for use of multiple additional power units. Gasly was disqualified from qualifying for a technical nonconformity, which turns out he had a peak on the fuel flow meter, which exceeded the limit for a very brief time, which followed his very slow upshift on his fastest lap. It did make him lose a 10.5 in the end, so that was a shame because he didn't actually gain anything from performance. But the rules rule is the rule, according to Pierre Gasly's Instagram post, and he is able to continue racing at the steward's discretion. Following that, though, both Hamilton and Ocon were required to start from the pit lane after both of those cars were modified whilst under park firm, and additional power unit elements had been used for their cars, which means that they had to start from the pit lane, which means that Pierre was no longer the last one to start on the grid. Nor was Zhou Guanyu. Lewis and Esteban had to start from the pit lane. All right, moving on to the race. Starting with the start, the biggest things that happened at the start were that Checo overtook Carlos immediately into P3 and Max overtook George. So immediately from the start, it became Charles, Oscar, Checo, Carlos, Max, and George. Oh my God, the smell of cumin has just filled this entire place in my nose. I think cumin might be my favorite smell. Sorry. So also at the start, Lance did a random aggressive overtake and ended up tapping Yuki, causing a hole to appear in his side pod, which eventually made Yuki retire. Again, the second race in a row. He also retired in Monza, and it's very frustrating for poor little Yuki because he's not actually doing anything wrong. There's just a giant hole in his side pod. So before I get into the key of this race, which was the Ferraris and the McLarens, I want to talk about Max and Checo, but I want to talk about Max super quick. So Max truly had the shittiest day. It was way too sunny, and apparently he only has two visors, and one is too big and one is too small, and neither of them are conducive to him actually seeing what's going on track. So first of all, his visibility was impaired, and then following that, it turns out that he also had issues with his brakes, which is probably more reflective of McLaren not adapting to the weather. So it was so hot that they didn't adjust the brakes to be conducive to that temperature, which caused Max's brakes to malfunction. And there was some sort of setup in general that Max just wasn't happy about. He complained about it during quali, and he continued to complain about it throughout the race, and the car was just not working for him. I did find it funny that at one point the commentator was like, if you're new to Formula One and you've just joined, welcome, but you're probably wondering why Norris, Max, and Hamilton are in P6, P7, and P14. And I can guarantee you no one was fucking wondering that, because if you've just joined Formula One, you don't know who anyone is. You might be wondering about Lewis Hamilton, maybe you've heard of Max Verstappen, but in general, you're not wondering why they're there. If you've been here for a while, you are wondering why they're there. Now adding the dried fruit to the meat before it finishes cooking, so it has a little time to steam with the meat. I'm gonna just lower the temperature so it has a few seconds to sit here with apricots and the prunes before I add the rice and the saffron. I also love that Max suffering has people and Checo doing well in Baku. People are like, well, Checo has outqualified Max and he's not outperforming Max, so therefore he's better than Max. Obviously, he's not better than Max. And Max is not worse than the car. The car is shit, and Max's setup is worse than Checo's, and Checo also thrives in Baku. It happens. And it happens that the best person in the world is sometimes outperformed. It doesn't make Max bad. It doesn't make Checo good. It makes Max bad in this race and Checo good in this race. Whatever is happening at Red Bull, whether it's Adrian Newey leaving, whether it's something else, they need to get their shit together because they're squandering away their best asset, which is Max Verstappen. They're not struggling right now because of Max Verstappen. They're struggling right now because of themselves. And the fact that Max qualified P6 and finished P5, which he probably only finished P5 because Charles and Checo were DNF'd. So things aren't looking great for Max. And while it's certainly more exciting than him winning by 30 seconds every single race, I'd like for him to at least be battling Oscar and Charles or something. Him just perpetually being in P6 is just sad and depressing and not fun for anyone. We want the best driver in the world competing against the other drivers. We do. We just do. All right. I think I might have gotten too small of a pot for this, but we'll just hope it works. All right, adding the rice. Okay, so in case you can't see, I've now added all the ingredients into the plof. I'm gonna turn on the heat to full volume. Let me just move this over. There's the plof boiling itself. I'm gonna cover it. And while we finish this race recap, that might be way too close to my face. While we finish this race recap, I am gonna finish the plof. All right, moving on to Lando's race. So I've got to hand it to Lando. He's had a killer race. He qualified P17 because of the whole flag debacle, but he started P15 because there was a lot of back of the grid starts and like yada, yada, yada. So he worked his way up to the top like quite rapidly. From P15, he ended up in P4 at the end of the race. I do have to give him an extra shout out because he helped Oscar during the race. Oscar pits while he was still fighting for P2 and Checo was closing in. And Lando was ahead of Checo at this time in P5. Checo was in P6. And like he gets asked on the radio if he can hold up Checo without hurting his own race. And Lando's like, yeah, no problem. He swerves in front of Checo. Checo goes, he's holding me up. Brilliant observation, Checo. I don't know how you came up with that. He eventually is able to overtake Lando quite easily as he has DRS, which Lando does not. But Lando holding him up as long as he did was helpful because even though Checo ended up overtaking Lando before Oscar came out of the pit lane, there was enough holdup. So by the time that Oscar did come out of the pit lane, he was able to come out right in front of Checo, which was great for McLaren and it was great teamwork. And it was just kind of like all that bullshit for nothing. Basically, before this race, McLaren said that they were going to, the papaya rules had been adjusted to prioritize Lando. So if Lando was in the lead, they would do everything they could to make sure he won, and Oscar would have to support that. All that became absolute nonsense because Lando ended up qualifying P17, Oscar ended up qualifying P2, and it ended up being Oscar's race that had to be supported. And I know like no one actually, like everyone like talks about team rules, but no one actually likes team orders. They're weird and they're awkward. They imply a hierarchy that's not always there, or they enforce a hierarchy that shouldn't be. It's just not great. And I don't think there are some teams that do like live by that at certain points, like McLaren, like Mercedes with Lewis and Valtteri, and just like there are teams that live by those sort of rules, D1, D2. I don't think McLaren is one of those teams. Clearly, I don't think it's because of contract clauses, which is something that's been argued that Mark Webber put into Oscar's contract that he couldn't be referred to as a D2 because he personally didn't like being referred to as a D2. That could be there. But unfortunately for McLaren, Oscar is a very, 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 very strong driver. I sort of see it as Charles and Carlos, except there's no like country loyalty to one or the other. Do you know what I mean? Like in Italy, Charles is baby Jesus. But in McLaren, I don't think Oscar or Lando necessarily take that priority. They just unfortunately have two very, very excellent drivers who are both performing above and beyond. And I think it's just, they're at a stage where they find themselves where it's unnecessary to pinpoint a D1 or D2. I do, however, think that circumstantially there is a D1 and D2. For example, last race in Italy, when it was a P2 or P3 finish, they could have easily swapped so that Lando had just like that much more of a point advantage over Max. They didn't do that though, and I think that's why everyone freaked out, because it became so clear that like it wasn't hard to give Lando a couple extra points. It wasn't like they were fighting for P1. They weren't like sacrificing anything for Oscar. But anyway, they did it. After that, everyone made such a big deal about it that McLaren was like, okay, yeah, of course we prioritize Lando and his World Drivers' Championship opportunity. So we come to Baku and everyone's like, oh, what are they going to do now? And then Lando qualifies P17, Oscar qualifies P2, and everyone's like, oh, are they gonna prioritize Lando because he's P17, because he's Lando? Like everyone's fans are being stupid, right? Like unless Lando finds himself neck to neck with Oscar, they weren't gonna interfere, and I don't think they should interfere, because why would they? And everyone's like very dramatic about it, but like Lando helping Oscar in this situation doesn't actually like mean anything. Lando was literally in the position to hold up Checo. Lando was literally behind Oscar. There was like no compromising one race or the other by Lando helping Oscar, and I don't think that qualifies as like anyone sacrificing anything. Like in the past, there's been situations where it was acceptable for Oscar to help Lando and vice versa, like at this race. But like the only race where I think they fucked up, it was the race in Italy where P2, P3, they really should have prioritized Lando's additional few points. And like I also think it makes both of the drivers worse. Like this like pressure and stress from the outside world, from the inside world of like, you're helping the other, so you're losing. Like none of that is actually conducive to them performing at their best. Like they're both excellent drivers. We don't need to ruin all of their successes by hanging this over it. And fans love to ruin shit as they're pretending to support their favorite people. Anyway, my 2 cents is that on the McLaren, like on this whole McLaren papaya rule situation, is basically too long didn't read. Lando had an amazing race, and despite not being the finish he wanted for himself, it was a fucking phenomenal drive. Like making up 11 spots is not easy work, no matter how good your car is. And finishing on a slightly lighter note, I really want to talk about Lando's radio that he received, which quoting his engineer, said, "Imagine Andrea on your shoulder saying 0 wheel spin every exit." Imagine Andrea on your shoulder? Like, dude, who's the devil? Is it going to be like Andrea and Zach Brown? Like, why is Andrea on Lando's shoulder? All right, so moving on to Oscar and Charles. So thanks to Lando's holdup, while Oscar was in the pit lane, Oscar had time to build up a lead. Checo ended up overtaking Lando before Oscar even left the pit lane, and he exited right in front of Checo. Oscar did, but he ended up maintaining the lead and came out right in front of him, maintained the lead, and ended up in P2. Because then Checo, once he overtook Lando, he also had to overtake Alex into P3. And by the time he caught up to Oscar position-wise, Oscar had already had like up to 2 seconds lead. And also just like a little shout out to Alex Albon, because Lando kept mentioning in every single one of his post-race interviews that like he was held up by Alex Albon. And I think that's hilarious. And then this was like lap 18, lap 19, and then like lap 20, out of absolutely fucking nowhere, Oscar overtakes Charles into P1. Like, what the fuck, Oscar? It was such a like surprise move. Not only were we all surprised, but he just like, he skirted ahead of Charles in a way that I think even Charles was like, wait, what? Like he wasn't driving in a way like he was going to overtake Charles. He just did. It was incredible. It was an incredible sneak maneuver. I loved every second of it. And basically, he stays there, but he doesn't stay there easily, right? Like Charles is like in DRS the entire time. Up until like the last 2 laps, he's like behind Oscar with DRS the whole time. So he's less than 2 seconds behind Oscar the whole time. So Oscar is under pressure that he could be overtaken at any minute, which Charles certainly attempted multiple times. He did not succeed, but he attempted over and over and over again. So Oscar was never like without pressure. And then Charles was driving in Oscar's dirty air for like 30 plus laps. And that's really hard. And to continuously be within DRS distance is so fucking impressive. Like they both went above and beyond. If there was a joint driver of the day award, I think they both deserve it, because Charles was in dirty air. Oscar was defending against literally a 30 lap like risk of being overtaken. It just was nonstop for both of them. After the race, Charles said that he felt that he had given up the lead once he had pitted onto hard tires, which is wild to say because he had pitted onto hard tires before Oscar even had an attempt to overtake him, and he didn't even know Oscar was going to be able to overtake him, which is, I think, like, it's sort of like a hindsight sort of comment. Like, now that I look back, it was the hard tires that did this to me, not my driving. which I fully believe. Like, it wasn't like Charles was driving poorly. It was just a conditional thing in the fact that they were both able to maintain the pace within the environment they found themselves in. Truly stellar performances from both drivers. I did lull though when with 15 laps to go, Ferrari asked Charles if he wanted to pit. They were like, so plan C? And Charles was like, that's literally fucking stupid. And yeah, it is literally stupid. And speaking of the word stupid, in free practice, Charles slammed into the wall at one point and he was like, I am stupid. And it was literally just like a reincarnation of his very famous into the wall incident where he was like, I am stupid, that plays over and over again. I don't know if that's what he was channeling or if it was an accident, but he said the same thing. So some things, his internal monologue clearly doesn't differ. It's clearly continuously, I am stupid. All right, so in the last 10 laps, again, Charles got pretty close to Oscar. In fact, all the top fours were like really close to each other. And it's kind of annoying for me personally because if you've been here before, you know that I really fucking struggle with the names Checo, Charles, and Carlos all in a row. And whenever they're separated, I mess up their names. And whenever they're together, I mess up their names because I'm typing the same thing over and over again. So my notes are always a hot mess. So this wasn't like great for me. But basically, hopefully this is accurate. Checo attempts to overtake Charles in like lap 50. He fails. Charles managed to defend quite spectacularly. So Checo is behind him, but he's still definitely close. And then Carlos closes in and literally in the same move that Checo attempted to overtake Charles, Carlos overtook Checo. And in his very smooth move, ended up in P3, and it looked like two Ferraris were just zooming ahead of Checo. But Checo was like, not so fast, Carlos Sainz, please. And so he tries to overtake Carlos, and this is where everything goes haywire. So it looks basically like Carlos's car developed a mind of its own and just like tweaked into the direction of Checo, but like in slow motion, what actually happened was Checo, Carlos overtook Checo. Checo was following Carlos. Checo was trying to overtake Carlos. Carlos was on the right side of the track, very close to the racing line where the white line is. He was like literally on the border of it. Checo was closing in on Carlos. And he's like very, very, very close to the point where he accidentally, it looks like he taps very, very gently. He taps Carlos's rear wing, which causes Carlos to go like, but like it was all so fast. And once you watch in slow motion, it looks like Carlos literally just like turned into Checo. But I don't think that's what happened. I think Checo slightly bumping into Carlos caused Carlos's car to go and he like swerved into Checo, and it ended up being like he was at an angle that caused Checo to be like stuck in his car, and because they both got like swerved to the side, they were stuck into the wall. So Checo was like smushed between Carlos's car and the wall in like a triangular position, and they kept driving. So like in this weird smushed position, they just kept moving forward, and there was nothing Carlos could do. There was nothing anyone could do. And it was just shitty because Checo had the space. Checo really had the fucking space. Carlos left him the entire lane. The entire lane besides his own car was at Checo's disposal. And Checo was like, nah, I'm not going to use this space. And then got mad at Carlos to the point that like once they finally stopped within the wall, he was like, there was a lot of gesticulation with his hands. He popped out of the car and like went over to yell at Carlos. It looked like he bopped him on the helmet, which is ridiculous. And like, there's a very big distinction between their radios. Checo is very clearly going, like swearing so much that it's being bleeped out. And like Carlos is just going, I don't understand what happened. Like, what happened? Because he did nothing. He actually did nothing. And he was just so baffled. It was because Checo bumped his car so gently. He didn't even realize what happened. And that caused his car to like swerve uncontrollably. They did end up going to the stews, and the stews all said that it was a racing incident, which is what I'm inclined to believe. But if we were going to assign blame, I would assign it to Checo. Even though it looked originally like Carlos had caused the issue, it was actually Checo that caused the issue, and no one paid attention to the fact that he had the entire lane for space. Carlos was ahead of Checo when he attempted that move, which means he had the racing line. It was his. The racing line was his. He followed it. Checo was like, nah. And so tried to overtake Carlos by pushing up against him, which caused this whole situation. So in any case, I know it sounds like I'm biased, but Carlos is not at fault in any capacity. All right, so the end of the race, it was first a yellow flag, and then it caused a virtual safety car. So the last lap and a half of the race was finished the way it was started. So Oscar definitely won the race, but even if that hadn't happened, there was there was a 1% chance that Charles was going to be able to catch up and overtake him. I was slightly annoyed that Oscar couldn't just have one race, without any conflicts. You know what I mean? Last time he was so downtrodden because it felt like McLaren had given him the win, even though it was their strategy that put Lando ahead of him. So they just swapped it back. But it just definitely took the wind out of his sails for sure, and took the wind out of everyone's sails. And so I'm glad he finally got a win that was very clearly warranted and very clearly earned. And he had done, it was his. It was 100% his, but I just wish he was able to finish it without the virtual safety car, Because of this incident with Carlos and Checo, George Russell ended up in third, and he was like, what am I doing here? It was just accidentally in third. And it's cool and random, but it's just funny because George is always there. He's always ready to take over if the opportunity arises. And it's also extra funny because at the beginning of the race, he was asked what strategy he had after qualifying. He was asked what his strategy was before the race, and he was like, for the crash out, and we win. And that's basically what happened. 2 of the top 4 crashed out, and he ended up in third, and it's just fucking hilarious. There's a hilarious picture of George and Oscar talking at that little place where they take off their helmets and drink some water, the little stand thing. And Oscar is like, what the fuck are you doing here? And George is like, I don't know what I'm doing here. And Charles is like, hello. It was just a really funny combination. It was captured at the perfect moment. Post-race, I just need to Oscar's celebration of winning a race is so comically understated. He literally whispered yes, I won. Yes. It was so funny. And then he followed it up with this was the most stressful day of my life. But he said it so calmly. He was like, this is the most stressful day of my life. And I think he might be low-key a serial killer. The killing being dominating on track. But I'm a little concerned by how emotionless he is. He almost sounds medicated. It's so calm, it sounds prescribed. I do feel a bit bad for Charles. He sounds really depressed on the radio. The engineers sound depressed on radio, and I don't know why they all sound so depressed. They could be a bit happier considering the fact they had since lap 20. So over 30 laps to come to terms with the fact that they're not winning this race, which was quite clear. The radio at Mercedes was Toto calling into George and being like, we have so much to learn around here. And George was like, thanks, Toto. Tires. Which is true, but you could say congrats. Even though George got that by accident. Oscar got driver of the day. When he was told on the radio, he goes, thank you. I don't know what thank you in Azerbaijani is, but thank you. It's still so calm. I can't handle it. Why is he like that? When he got out of his car, he stumbled, he almost fell into his cockpit, but he got his balance. He stood in the car, did the whole pose, and then he ran over to his engineers. And next to the engineers was his little mom. And seeing Nicole Piastri in person is one of the greatest thing that's ever happened to me in my entire life. She is my celebrity. I love her to death. I'm so happy she's here. And sometime in between the podium and hugging him at the wall with all the engineers, she managed to tweet, "So definitely no Pilates tomorrow." Apparently that was supposed to be an Australian accent, but you get what I mean. I loved it. I love her on Twitter. She should never get off of Twitter. I would like to hear her opinions on everything. I hope she never leaves. I thought it was very strange that only one Ferrari engineer came over to congratulate Charles. I think that's bizarre. I don't know why they're all so bummed. Like, they literally had the whole race to like process that they were not winning. It was just very weird. I don't know if it was because of Carlos and they were all tending to Carlos, but Charles has his own set of engineers, so I don't know why no one was there to celebrate with him. I was also fuming when they all started to discuss the race when they were standing over at that stand with where they put their helmets and drink the water, because I'm like, please save this for the cool down room. You are not mic'd. We cannot hear you. But I did see like Oscar and Charles being like, why are you here, George, with their faces. And then I could see Charles it was very animated, describing what happened with Carlos and Checo. But he was only describing up to the point where Carlos overtook Checo, because then you could hear him go, and then I don't know what happened. So he shed no light to the situation, but I guess it was enough for George to go over during his post-race interview and be like, I'm glad they were both safe. So anyway, in the cool down room, as they were like watching all the replays, they saw the replay of Oscar overtaking Charles, and George just started giggling. Then Oscar started giggling, and then Charles started giggling before it looked like it was turning into sobs internally. And then Oscar turns to Charles and goes, "Is your back destroyed?" And Charles is like, "No." And then he whips around to George and goes, "Is your back destroyed?" And George is like, "But my feet hurt." And it was just giving Mean Girls when they were in Regina's bedroom and they were all like listing their insecurities, like their pores and like whatever else. And Katie goes, my breath smells bad. George Russell is Katie Heron in this situation, like to a T. It was really fucking funny. We watched them watch some of the highlights. Eventually, the very last clip we saw was them watching the crash between Checo and Carlos. And there's just like silence. And then Oscar goes, "Well, they haven't been great friends this weekend." And Charles is like, "Oh yeah, Oscar, please, like, why are you pointing this out?" Oscar was the gold in the cool down room, and I loved every second. The podium ceremony was nice, if not a bit odd. Oscar only sprayed his engineer, Charles only sprayed Oscar, and George just sprayed the air from a distance. I don't know why he didn't get closer to them. But then Oscar walked over to George and cheers with his champagne bottle, and then Charles came over and just like sprayed Oscar from like a close distance. It was quite funny and bizarre because Charles clearly didn't want to be there. He was very upset that he got P2 and not P1. All right. So the driver of the day is Oscar. He got driver of the day officially, and he deserves it more than I can even communicate. However, as always, there are a few honorable mentions. Lando drove from P15 to P4. As much as it pains me, it was incredible, and he deserves an honorable mention. Charles drove an amazing race to finish P2 despite being in dirty air literally the entire race. Also deserves an honorable mention, and he deserves to not feel shitty about himself. I don't know why he is. And even though it's not like driver of the day worthy, honorable mentions certainly include Franco Calpinto for finishing P8 in his second race ever, and it being Baku, no less. And Ollie Bierman, who outplaced his teammate and scored a point for Haas. And shout out to Alex Albon, who was P3 and generally just like in the top 5 for as long as fucking possible and ended up finishing P7. Ended up finishing P7. Just like, way to go, buddy. I'm very proud of Alex. The dick in the box. This one's a bit hard because I feel like there was no like dick. There was like, maybe Lance gets dick in the box because he tried to overtake at the start, which put a hole in Yuki's side pod and forced him to retire for the second race in a row. That was kind of dicky. And then maybe it was the Carlos and Checo incident, like as a concept. I think Checo was certainly more of the dick, but in general, it was just a dicky situation. And then I think also Red Bull deserves to be called the dick in the box because they can't figure out what's up with their car and there's like no clear-cut solution. They just can't figure it out. And I feel like that's a dicky thing to do. So there's no clear-cut dick, but there's definitely dicky behavior, and I feel like we should call that out. So the final results are as follows: Oscar, Charles, George, Lando, Max, Fernando, Alex, Franco, Ollie, Nico, Pierre, Daniel, Joe, Esteban, Valtteri, and the DNFs include Carlos, Checo, Lance, and Yuki. The standings have changed significantly. So in the Drivers' World Championship, there's Max with 313 points, Norris with 254, which puts him 59 points behind Max. Charles has 235, putting him 19 points behind Lando. And Oscar has 222 points, putting him 32 points behind Lando. After that, it goes Carlos with 184, Lewis with 166, George with 143, Checo with 143. They're tied. And then Fernando with 58 and Lance with 24. In the Constructors' Championship, there's McLaren with 476, Red Bull with 456. So they've overtaken Red Bull by 20 points in the Constructors' Championship. After Red Bull with 456 points, it's Ferrari with 425, Mercedes with 309, Aston with 82, RB with 34, Haas with 29, Williams with 16, Alpine with 13, and Kick Sauber with 0. And with that, we conclude the Baku Grand Prix. Literally, what a race, though. It was a day for rookies. It was a day for Oscars. It was a day for literally one of the best races we've seen in a long time. Before we head over to next week, I want to show you guys how the pull-off turned out. Here's the pull-off. Isn't it pretty? Just finishing up. Next up is Singapore. I am going on a trip to Chicago the week after, but I'm going to try with all my might to make fish head curry because I really fucking want to. Make sure you follow BoxBox F1 Pod on social media to keep up in between races because there's gonna be drama and fun, and I'm sure in the next few days. And you don't want to miss it. It would mean the world to me if you also reviewed, subscribed, or recommended BoxBox F1 Pod to any potential F1 boxes. The more the merrier. And as always, feel free to DM me or email me any thoughts, questions, or content I might have missed, because I'm definitely missing a lot of content and you guys help keep me up to date. So see you in Singapore. BoxBox.